Welcome, and thank you for being here. We're very grateful to you for joining us tonight and for being part of our community. My name is Elric Walker. I'm a board member of the Jung Association of Western Massachusetts. Before we begin, I would like to tell you a little bit about our association. We are a mostly volunteer organization founded in 1996, concerned with promoting and exploring in community with others the ideas of the great depth psychologist Carl Gustav Jung. I want to take a quick moment to introduce you to our board members and to the members of our advisory board, and to thank them all for their good work on behalf of the association. Christine Olson is our president and fearless leader. Penelope Tarasuk and Erica Lorenz are current board members and advisors, and they are two of the longest serving members on the board. Erica Lorenz served previously as our president. Both Erica and Penelope are authors and practicing Jungian analysts. Judy Hall is our bookkeeper. Yay, Judy. Thank you. Peter O'Brien is our project development. I serve as public relations liaison and promotional coordinator for the association. We are also very grateful to the members of our advisory board. Author, poet, and depth psychotherapist Dr. Ed Tick, who previously served on our board of directors. Psychologist and therapist Dr. Carol Beauvais, who also previously served on our board of directors. Retired family therapist and historian Peter Williams, who also previously served on our board of directors. And Joe Coolin, who was the former publisher of Parabola magazine and who has recently become a children's book author. We want to thank them all for their many ongoing contributions and for their much sought after sage wisdom. On behalf of our president and the members of the current board, I want to offer many thanks to those of you who have stepped forward to consider participation on our board. We asked and you responded. We are still seeking one more local person to join our team. Please contact our president, Christine Olson. You can find her email tonight in the chat room, or you can look her up on the website. Many kind thanks to Andrew Grant, who is a longtime friend of our association and who will be wearing two hats this evening, providing Zoom and technical assistance as well as being our presenter. Thank you, Andrew. I would like to mention that we are resurrecting our film and discussion events starting in February. These events will be local and in person. Some of you may have attended these before the pandemic and remember the rich and informative dialogues that we had. We used to refer to this as soul talk. The general structure of these events will be the watching of a 30 to 40 minute film clip on a Jungian subject, after which we will open up to a general discussion. Whether you're well acquainted with or whether you're new to Jung, this is a wonderful opportunity to get together with others, to learn and to share. So please join us on Sunday, February the 2nd at 4 p.m. at Smith College Campus Center, room 102. We begin our series with excerpts from the documentary film Dancing in the Flames with Marion Woodman. This film is an interview with Marion as she relates a deep and insightful wisdom from her years as a Jungian analyst and from her position at the time of the interview as a respected elder and wise woman. Check our website for more information on this and on any other events. You will also find there in the archive section of the website videos of past lectures and events. The website address is westmassjung.org. Again, that's westmassjung.org. Now, upcoming, we will be deviating from our usual first Fridays in January. Our lecture in January will be on a Saturday, and it will be in the late morning. So do mark this on your calendar. This will be a little different. Saturday, January 11th at 11 a.m., and it will go to 1 p.m. We'll present Sharon Blackie, The Post-Heroic Journey. In her 2018 book, The Enchanted Life, she suggests that the time of the hero is over, and she proposes instead the concept of a post-heroic journey. So please remember, the lecture in January will be on a Saturday. In February, we will return to our regular schedule of First Fridays. On Friday, February 7th, we will welcome Mary Antonia Wood for her lecture, Artist, Alchemist, Activist, Archetypal Transformers of Psyche, Matter, and Reality. And now, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Penelope Tarasuk, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Elric. I want to welcome you to meet Andrew Grant, who is both a personal friend and a friend of the Jung Association of Western Mass for about a decade now, and a regular Zoom host. He really assists us and makes these things run very smoothly. Thank you, Andrew. Andrew holds master's degrees in divinity, one from Emory University, 1989, and a library and information science degree from Rutgers in 2007. After serving as a Methodist minister, and that was I didn't know that till we met and talked about this. Andrew served as a Methodist minister, but he found his spiritual home with the Quakers. He is currently seeking to redress the harms of settler colonization by looking into his family history and as an archival researcher investigating Quaker assimilation of children through so-called Indian boarding schools. And I have read his work. It's beautifully done and truly a work of individuation. Andrew is the father of 2 adult children, and he's supporting his mother in Haydenville, Massachusetts. He's going to share insights from his chapter entitled Defiant Remembering, A Quest for Transgenerational Healing, in an anthology edited by Ipek Burnett. We had a talk centered around those pieces, so you can find those in that particular evening talks in our archives. Tonight, we're invited by Andrew to dive deeply into the life of his Nantucket whaling ancestors, one of the storylines in the chapter, and to consider the promise of shadow integration. While his talk will not address recent world and national events, he's quite aware that these realities may come up in the discussion portion of the evening. And Andrew, I honor you, I bow to you in the work you've done. So thank you for sharing some of that with us tonight.
Thank you for your gracious introduction, Penelope. As Penelope said, I have been a friend of the Jung Association of Western Mass for about a decade, and I have had the great benefit of working as a client with 2 depth psychotherapists, Thayer Green, and that was mainly about the starting of my relationship with my beloved partner, Mona. And then in the course of working together, realizing that we had striking intersections of experience, including the fact that he knew my father when my father was an undergrad at Amherst College in the 1950s. And the second person, after a gracious handover from Thayer to Dr. Ed Tick, who recently described himself as a therapeutic mentor, and that has been my definite experience of being helped as I've worked with Ed on this sometimes arduous journey of truth and healing. I would like to acknowledge that we are on, at least I am on, the traditional land of the Nantucket people, referring to people who lived in the middle of the long river known as the Connecticut River. As we get started, I would like to be transparent about some frames of reference that have informed my work. And one comes from my Quaker practice, an old time expression, let love be the first motion. And I think of the passage in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15, which in the First Nations version is rendered this way. As true human beings, we will walk out this truth on the path of love. A second framework for me is a legacy of being the son of my father, Robert Ernest Grant. He had a 40-year career as a minister, an ordained minister, and at heart he was an artist. It's my father who often exclaimed with wonder, "Look!" After his death in 2017, I summarized this gift that I received from my father. Behold the play of light and shadow. I've often, in the writing of this chapter, referred back to that holding light and shadow. And in practice, I understand that light and shadow complete the portrait, and you'll hear more about that as we go along. The third frame I want to offer is the anatomy of hate. As a young minister, my father was actually present in 1963 on the National Mall and heard Dr. King give his I Have a Dream speech. It's said of Dr. King that he always carried two books, the Bible and Jesus and the Disinherited by Black mystical theologian Howard Thurman, sometimes referred to as the theologian of the Black liberation movement. In the fourth chapter of that book, Thurman describes the anatomy of hate. Contact without fellowship leads to understanding without sympathy, leads to ill will, leads to hatred walking on the earth. That is my summary of the chapter, and it's a frame of reference, as I've mentioned, that I carry with me in the work. I invite, as we go along, let me just pause for a moment. I have found that this work that I'm doing is heavy. Often I feel heavy laden, and I'm learning to take breaks, to pause, to breathe, and I've integrated those kinds of breaks in this presentation. You'll hear the sound of surf for about 20 seconds, and then we'll move on. Genealogy itself is a marker of privilege. For about 40 years, I've been that one in my family who's looked back with curiosity and interest. Who were my people? What can I know about them? And I have found an abundance of information, including libraries, books, and even living museums. In the 10th generation, we have 1,024 grandparents. And as far as I can tell, and I have looked broadly, my ancestors in totality, maybe a few exceptions, but as a mass, came over in the 1600s as part of the Great Puritan Migration. They left England and settled in a place they called New England. What motivated them? Religious freedom, as the myth goes, but what else? What were they seeking? What were they leaving? And critically important, what was their impact on the people who were here? At this time in my life, I'm learning to love my ancestors, to stand with them in good and bad. I'm accounting for the impacts of settler colonization. And as the title of my chapter indicates, I refuse to participate in the collective amnesia about the impact, about the trauma on the living communities that were here, not only human, but more than human communities in this place. The truth is that the arrival of my people has had a devastating impact on the original people of this land. And the people were brought here from other lands. My ancestors made claims to land that was already inhabited for millennia by people who lived here and lived well. Along the way, I've looked for clues or telltale signs, and one clue that was surprising to me and has proven quite important is that when my people came, the historical evidence is that they would not have regarded themselves as members of the white race. They would have regarded themselves as being of the English race or the Scottish race. But the designation, the self-designation as white people, evolved at the end of the 17th century in the context of racialized slavery and unequal social status in the European colonies. The chapter that I've referenced is in an anthology edited by Ipek Burnett, who has spoken here at this forum, Revisiting the American Psyche. And I'm in good company. Dennis Slattery, who's also spoken here, wrote a chapter, and Ed Tick, who's on our call today, wrote a chapter, and I have a chapter. So my first blush reaction to this is, what's wrong with this picture? And what's wrong is that I'm included in this company. I am distinctly unqualified to present at the Jung Association. I don't have the credentials. I haven't read the corpus of Jung's work. Yet I've been encouraged to report by Dennis and by Ed in particular, to report on my direct experience of seeking to know my ancestors and to undertake the work of intergenerational healing. In the story I'm going to tell tonight, I'm not talking about violence that's come to my people. I'm going to be referring to violence that my people enacted. This is a hard story to tell. It might be hard to hear, and I encourage you as we go along to please take care of yourselves. If you need to take a break from the screen or to depart the meeting, whatever you need, please take care of yourself. I'll just go on. I am going to read from the chapter only portions of the book that I think will help set the stage for our deep dive tonight. This comes from the early part of the chapter. Confrontation. My family of origin was eerily silent about the people of the land, variously called Native Americans, Indigenous peoples, or American Indians, among other names, who were here before our arrival. We hardly spoke about their ongoing presence or experiences in the place we call home. To me, our silence is a subtle indication of our complicity in genocide as defined by international conventions, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. As an act of conscience, I refuse to continue participating in the collective amnesia about what happened here. Rather than repressing our family history, I intend to look for my ancestors, embrace them, see them in context, and stand with them beyond good and bad, even if I find their deeds repugnant. Why would I lock them in the cell of an unremembered past? In the words of Carl Jung, then turn to the dead, listen to their lament, and accept them with love. Referring to the archetypal psychotherapist James Hillman, E. Peck Burnett writes, quote, if innocence in America is about not knowing and not wanting to know either, then trying to understand the significance of this innocence in the American psyche puts us on a quest for knowledge, self-knowledge in particular. End quote. I accept this charge. My quest has led me to encounter human-on-human atrocities. Perhaps incongruously, it has also led me to revisit the mass slaughter of whales. I consider that moral injury, the consequence of overriding conscience to commit acts of violence, may be woven into my family tapestry. Archetypal psychotherapist and author Ed Tick, a contributor to this volume, asserts that moral injury is now recognized as a critical component of military wounding and must also be seen as a wound passed on through the generations, even to distant offspring of the original transgressors. The resolution of transgenerational trauma, metabolizing a violent past by addressing it, causes a shift that I feel almost at a cellular level when I register the traumatic encounter and let the shudder, sorrow, outrage, pain, regret run through me and pass cleanly, I am changed. Allowing waves of grief clarifies my vision. Digesting hard truths energizes me in surprising ways. As Ed suggested to me with this presentation, I'm not only giving you the results, but I'm showing you the math. I'm going to be showing you the journey that I took and the stops along the way. Importantly, the chapter includes an experience I had in 2021 involving the place Hilo, Hawaii. I had a series of synchronous events, starting with my Nantucket whaling family, a Wampanoag, the Truth and Healing Commission bill that I'll be talking about, a Wampanoag gathering on Indigenous Peoples Day, and meeting a kahuna, and I'll explain what that involved. So in the next period of time, we'll be walking through these synchronicities one by one and looking at them in detail. Starting with the first that I know the most about, the whaling family. My grandmother's grandfather, Murray, the child of a Nantucket whaling family, was born on the Big Island of Hawaii in the midst of a 4-year whaling voyage. His father was the captain, and his mother, Azuba, is featured in the book Sometimes Think of Me, Notable Nantucket Women Through the Centuries. This is the layout from the book, and this is a story that I know well and hold dear. I'd like to share with you one small episode from this story, which is Azuba. Her name, Azuba Bierce Cash. She often signed ABC. When she was 15 years old, she grew up in Catuit, Massachusetts, and when she was 15, she went to work as a seamstress in a tailor shop. Years later, one day, into the shop strode William S. Cash, a young Nantucket whaler who was between voyages. Now, William had been nursed on the story of his grandfather, William F. Cash, who was a whaling captain who was, quote, killed by the whale in the Sulawesi Sea in Indonesia. Picking up where his grandfather left off, young William became a precision whale-killing machine. Azuba, taking a fancy to William, slipped a note in his new jacket pocket. Quote, I hope to meet the dashing young man I made these clothes for. William barely survived his next voyage, and as soon as he made it back home, he found Azuba and they were married. They soon conceived their first child, Alexander, who was born when Cash was out at sea. In the first 10 years of their marriage, William was home only 6 months in total. So the next voyage, Azuba told the young captain, I'm going with you, and became what was known as a petticoat whaler, accompanying the captain of the ship. This is the transit from Nantucket around South America up past Hawaii and to Alaska that the Columbia undertook. Leaving the States, they conceived their second child. And by the time they arrived at Hawaii, Azuba was near birth, nearly ready to deliver. And they stopped at Hilo, Hawaii, on the Big Island. Here's a contemporaneous painting of the harbor of Hilo. And it was there that Murray was born. Now, Captain Cash continued on his voyage up to Alaska, and like his previous trips, he barely survived that. They were locked in ice, the rudder broke, and he came back to the news that his second child had been born. I'd like to take another look at the context for that trip. This is a display that's on the wall at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and it depicts whales taken between the years 1761 and 1920. The different species of whales are marked with different colors, and you can see the clusterings, including around the island of Hawaii, around the equator, near the coasts. When I encountered this chart at the New Bedford Whaling Museum, I stood there for a long time to take it in. My ancestor, William Cash, participated in an all-out war on whales, going to the far corners of the earth in pursuit of the animal, but for the purpose of generating wealth. So I ask, what does it mean that Captain Cash cashed in on what was arguably America's first peak oil event? This is a rendering of the ship Columbia by one of the seamen who was on that voyage. Notice that he included red ink, and the red was used to indicate in the logbook when a sperm whale or other type of whale was killed and harvested. So here's an actual entry in a logbook depicting that. Here's another image from the period showing the butchering of the sperm whale head and the whale itself with the red indicating coming out of the spout. And this is a short video that was one of the first talkie movies produced in 1922. About 70 years after the collapse of the Nantucket whaling industry, but the artifacts were still around and some of the people were still around. So this is an action adventure from 1922. There are details in that portrayal that are historically inaccurate, and I'll explain why that is. Um, but here we have a heroic view of a past time of whaling in the Northeast. My inquiry took me to the Nantucket Whaling Museum as well, and this is a log, a transcript from a log of ships that sailed from Nantucket in 1850. And you'll notice the Columbia here with Captain William Cash. And it left in 1850 and returned in 1854 with 1,634 barrels of whale oil. This was not prime oil. This was oil that was rendered from the blubber of whale. But at that time, it was worth $22,000, quite a large sum. And then 5 years later, Cash went out as captain of the Citizen and returned 4 years after a 4-year voyage with 2012 barrels of sperm oil, the higher grade, more valuable oil, and 130 barrels of whale blubber oil. I volunteered to transcribe the logbook of William Cash, and this is the opening of the logbook for his last voyage as a Nantucket whaler. And here I extrapolated from his compass points the different stops or different moments along his passage from Nantucket into the whaling grounds. What I discovered from transcribing the logs is how monotonous, how repetitive, how boring, in a way. Long stretches of boredom punctuated by extreme excitement and intensity. As I wrote in my chapter, I'm continuing to test my muscle memory for violence. And at this point, I'm going to speak in very clear terms about the technology of killing whales in this industry. If you'd like to turn off your volume for this portion, I'll be done in about 4 minutes. I briefly want to tell you about my experience of receiving a massage this last week and how in the course of that massage, I had a big tell when the therapist got to massaging my arm and hand. And I was reminded of how this implement was used and the context for it. Many people know about the harpoon, the pointed with the hook at the end that was used to stick the whale and would play out with a rope. And you might have even heard of the Nantucket sleigh ride when the boat would be pulled behind the whale. That was used to exhaust the whale, to bring it to a standstill. And the hunt was completed with this implement, the killing lance. What would happen when the whale was tired out is that the captain of the boat or the highest ranking officer of the whaleboat who had been steering in the pursuit would change places with the harpooner and move to the front of the boat for the honor of the kill. He would pick up this implement, which was razor sharp on all edges of the point, and would move to the place just behind the eye of the whale, and I imagine avoiding eye contact with the whale, and strike to the heart or lungs. And the telltale sign was what they called chimneys of fire, when blood from the dying whale would gush out of the spout. What I have had to grapple with, friends, is this action was repeated by my ancestor. He had a muscle memory for doing this on a pitching boat in all weather, picking up the killing lance and finishing off the whale. The other thing that I've had to consider is, how did the instructions that a Nantucket whaler candidate received differ from the instructions that a Wampanoag or Hawaiian youth would have received about the taking of a life? And this is where we come back to the anatomy of hate. Contact without fellowship leads to understanding without sympathy, leads to ill will, leads to hatred, walking on the earth, or we could say plying the seas of the globe. A key component was missing. My ancestors treated the whale as an enemy, a dumb brute, and enacted violence. What was missing was a sense of fellow feeling, of being bound together in a delicate and resilient web of life. For his last voyage, my ancestor bought a half share in his own whaling ship, the Bark Islander, and set sail in 1862. 3 years later, he brought back 2,400 barrels of sperm oil, 560 barrels of whale oil, and 1,800 pounds of baleen. In that voyage alone, he was responsible for the slaughter of no fewer than 30 sperm whales. And as a trophy, he brought back the 15-foot long jawbone of a sperm whale bull. That is a massive animal. With a jawbone 15 feet long, the whale itself would have been approximately 87 feet long, or 29 yards. Imagine 2 Greyhound buses end to end. It's an amazing physical feat and act of bravery that I, as a child, when I visited Nantucket with my family, marveled at this and was proud to hear of my ancestor. Now, this many years later, I'm looking at the rest of the story and holding as much as I can. The profits of the whaling industry enabled my ancestor to purchase a house. I've stood in front of this house on Orange Street in Nantucket, a summer place on what was known as Broadway in Sconset on Nantucket. And their summer getaway, this is ironic, was off island on Martha's Vineyard at an old revival camp meeting called Oak Bluffs. So I've told you that I'm a descendant of a Nantucket whaling family. Thank you for holding this story with me in all of its complexity. We'll have a brief interlude here and then return. Immersing myself in this story begs the question. We've talked about a whaling family. What about the whales? The question, what about the whales, started penetrating our collective conscience about a century later with songs like this dirge written for Greenpeace.
Now that we are all gone, there is no more hunting. The big fellow is no more. It's no use lamenting. What race will be next in line? Oh, for the slaughter. The elephant or the seal, or your sons and daughters. My soul has been torn from me, and I am bleeding. My heart, it has been rent, and I am crying. All beauty around me fades, and I am screaming. I am the last of the great whales, and I am dying.
These are sentient beings with highly evolved brains, the largest on the planet, mammals who nurse their young, having highly complex communication. I thought of the whales a few days ago when I was out walking and I saw a flock of bluebirds. I hardly recognized them. They were so puffed up with the winter cold. And they were sweetly talking to each other. And then cars came by. And I thought, wow, do they repeat themselves? And the same is experienced by the whales who aren't hunted to death. They're constantly harassed and their communications interrupted by all kinds of noise in the environment. I'm reminded of the persistence and resilience of whales, and even contemplating the possibility of forgiveness. These are sperm whales floating vertically in the water column. either communicating with each other or sleeping, I can't tell. It feels hard, even grievous, when I imagine Captain Cash entering this scene and what would follow. Synchronicity number 2. As a practicing Quaker with a concern for Indigenous relations, I am supported by my community, and I am employed professionally as an archival researcher looking into the Quaker assimilation of children through so-called Indian boarding schools. So I've done a lot of reading, and when the news comes along, I pick it up with interest. In 2021, there was a report that was published by the Department of the Interior. It was the first of 2 reports that have been published. And in the findings section of the report, I read General Armstrong modeled the Hampton Agricultural and Industrial School after the Hilo boarding school in Hawaii, a missionary-run boarding school that targeted high-performing Native Hawaiians to become indoctrinated in Protestant ideology. That shocked me, and this is the second synchronicity. Hilo led to the Hampton Institute, which was the model for Carlisle, that was the flagship for more than 300 industrial boarding schools across the continent. Even hitting closer to home, that family that hosted my Azuba when she was dropped off on the island was Titus Cohen and his wife Fidelia, who were missionaries on the island and who were founders of the Hilo boarding school. Also in the year 2021, I did an extended retreat at a Quaker retreat center and was rocked by the news that came, you might remember, the Kamloops boarding school, where there was a discovery of 215 unmarked graves from children who were buried next to the school. This is a self-portrait that I made at the time as I was absorbing that news and feeling tremendous sorrow. The third synchronicity occurred when I attended a gathering on Martha's Vineyard near Gay Head, which is at the southwestern tip of the island, hosted by the Aquinnah Wampanoag tribe on Indigenous Peoples Day. It was their first gathering to mark that day. And one of the presenters was Carol Vandal, who in talking mentioned that she had just returned from Hilo, Hawaii. So I went up and I talked with her, and I briefly told her the story of my ancestors, and her immediate response was, well, you have to go. And I didn't quite know what to do with that. Carol was there on the island to defend Mauna Kea, which is a dormant volcano, the tallest mountain on the planet if you measure it from its top to the bottom of the seafloor. Regarded as a sacred mountain, and the site of 13 telescope installations. And when there was a proposal to mount the largest telescope on the planet Earth on the top of that mountain, the grandmothers said no. I would like to introduce you to a poem, a reflection written by Dr. Jamaica Osorio about her experience of standing with the grandmothers. If you're not a native Hawaiian speaker, many of the words that are used will not be understandable. I don't understand them, but I think you will get the.
Ask me about the Mauna, and I will tell you about 30 Kanaka huddled shivering in an empty parking lot, praying the Lahui would answer the call. I will tell you about 2 nights spent caught sleeping directly under a sky scattered in stars, an air so clear, every inhale is medicine. How every morning we woke to a Lahui Kanaka growing as if we were watching Maui fish us one by one from the sea. Ask me about the Mauna, and I will tell you how on the 3rd morning I watched as 30 became 100, then 100 became 1,000, then 1,000 became us all, each and every one of our kupunas standing beside us. Ask me, and I will tell you the mo'olelo of 8 Kanaka chained to a cattle grate, and the kokua who sat beside us, how we were never alone in the malu of the Mauna, how no one is ever alone in the malu of our Mauna. Ask me, and I will recount their names, all 38, each kupuna who showed us mo'opuna exactly how to stand, how I wept and wept and wept as I quietly held their names in my chest. Ask me, and I will sing the song of our mana wahine, linked arms and unafraid, who stood in the face of a promise of sound cannons and mace. Ask me, and I will tell you I have been transformed here. But I won't have the words to quite explain. I will say, I don't know exactly who I will be when this ends. I don't know exactly who we will be when this ends, but at the very least, I will know that this aina did everything it could to feed me. That will be enough to keep me standing.
I invite you to consider, if I went to Hilo and I met these elders, what would I have to say? What would I experience? How would we be transformed? The 4th synchronicity is meeting Harry Euhane Jim, a kahuna and practitioner of Ho'oponopono, who, as you guessed probably, is from Hilo, Hawaii. And I met him here in Western Massachusetts when he was leading a workshop and teachings about Ho'oponopono, which is a healing tradition, Hawaiian healing tradition, and firsthand heard his resolute declaration that love prevails all trauma. He told us a wild story about his encounter when he was touring a place where the Constitution of the United States was on display. And on an opposite wall was this object that was labeled Polynesian neck ornament. He knew what that was. And it was from his tradition, lei niho paloa, a lei with the tooth of a sperm whale that represented the divine presence. And the lei itself is constructed with the hair of the previous chiefs of the tribe. It's a highly significant and spiritually important object. In that setting, he was moved to shout, "Hey, aloha, hey! Hey, aloha, hey!" Which he translated, "Love is here. Love is everywhere. Hey, aloha, hey!" And he was suddenly surrounded by 9 security guards who escorted him away. And he said, "Oh, there's a day for us, and this is not it." When he explained what he thought was going on and the meaning of love prevails all trauma, he made the point that past healing is evolution. We are going to get along. The main point of the ornament is not that we didn't get along. It's that we're going to get along. He asked, "Why do I know that?" The lei niho paloa says so. It's 10,000 years old, facing a paper that's 300 years old. This is directly from the chapter, and it's my main gift that I want to get across to you tonight. In a spiritual rendering aided by this kahuna, I had a mystical encounter with my wailing ancestor. What I saw was striking. A duty-bound, lonely, and depressed man. On his last voyage, Captain Cash surpassed his peers in the number of barrels returned. Yet I saw that he felt let down because excelling in the whaling industry and generating monetary wealth did not bring him closer to the pulse of life. Quite the opposite. He carried an unmet sorrow and gravity born of violence. He had command, but lacked joy and ease. This psychological portrait contrasts sharply with a sunnier view written about Cash not long after his death. Captain Cash entered heartily into the interests of his home, becoming a director of the savings bank and serving as a selectman of the town for several years. He died February 8, 1882, respected by all who knew him for his sterling qualities of head and heart, his directness, courage, honesty, and industry, and for the brave manner in which he fulfilled every duty that life presented to his hand. Perhaps light and shadow complete the portrait, a more lifelike rendering. As we come to the conclusion of this presentation, I want to return to the writing of E. Peck Burnett. Deconstructive processes expose the inherent complexities, contradictions, and ambiguities in the American psyche. So we can witness what breathes in the shadow of the presumed innocence and reinforces the vicious cycles of oppression and violence. These revelations can then help us understand that when it comes to self-recognition, nothing stands alone, and everything belongs. The light and the dark, high and low, good and evil, innocence and violence, and every shade of truth in between. So in Quaker fashion, I leave you with a couple of queries. And after I read these, I'll set up the breakout rooms and we'll have about 15 minutes for conversation in small groups before we return to a larger open discussion. What changes when we integrate shadow, hold light and shade together? What happens when we surrender the claim to innocence and embrace a deeper knowing? Go ahead, Julia.
Hi, Andrew. First of all, just thank you so much for your vulnerability and your willingness to share such a personal story, such a personal journey. I really enjoyed the breakout group. We started the discussion around accepting both the shadow and the light, and that we carry both, and that there's actually a lot of value in the darkness and in the shadow as well. And the two things that really stood out to me from your lecture tonight were the definition you had up there of moral injury being the consequence of overriding conscience to commit acts of violence. And I think about the acts of violence committed on children by their own parents, as well as acts of violence on animals, as well as on other people, including indigenous people and everything. So, and I think that I love this idea, that there is some form of understanding what this is, and moral injury is such a good way of sort of understanding it, what it does to a person. Because that whale, like we share a fellowship with all creatures, but that whale won't consciously commit an act of violence against us. So we really have this one up. We have one advantage, which is that human mind that thinks it can do something to something that can't defend itself beyond what nature has given it to defend itself. But we end up harming ourselves when we use that superiority or that function that humans have that animals maybe don't, to harm. And so I just feel like it's so important that we understand the cost that we're enduring when we harm any other sentient creature and being. So I thought that was really, really important. I've been watching Masters of Air on Apple Plus about World War II bombers and how the soldiers are grappling with dropping bombs on people and what that means. There's such a detachment to it, and then there's the reality of it. And they sort of weave those two stories together, and it's talk about moral injury for sure. And then your kahuna story is so beautiful. I love the love prevails all trauma and what he was shouting when he saw that lay. I wrote it down in my notes here. We may not be together as one now, but we will be one day, because the lay tells us so. So it's such a great light side to that shadow of the moral injury. So presentation was beautiful and balanced and thought-provoking, and very, very vulnerable. I was going to ask you, is there any point when you were doing this work where you felt maybe I don't want to know anymore? Or how are you grappling with the dark side of the family story and its effect?
I love your question. Thank you. This is shadow work, and I have realized I could go too deep into the shadow. I could be absorbed by it. I have to be careful. So spiritual practices, grounding. Um, I think of carrying heavy loads lightly, and I do test. Is there any indication that I've lost the savor of life, my ability to experience joy, delight, and I'm constantly looking for that. One thing that spurs me on, Julia, is I do, in a spiritual sense, have a feeling that the ancestors are glad for the work.
Mm.
They have an interest in more truth being released from the things that bound them in their day, and in forgiveness, however that might come. I do use the phrase war on whales intentionally because it does position us to have a conversation about moral injury. Yeah. Thank you so much for your response. I appreciate it.
You.
Let's go with Penelope, followed by Christine. You're muted.
I could say a lot, but we just scratched the surface of the depth of this. I also wanted to acknowledge that Joe Biden recently spent time on Indian land acknowledging the boarding school horrors. Really significant. It's never happened. And Deb,
Holland.
Holland did such a wonderfully in-depth report. And when I was in Santa Fe this summer, I was reading accounts and accounts and accounts about the boarding school intergenerational trauma. There's a lot of expression of that. In my experience of being with the whales and the dolphins is there's a forgiveness. They're curious and they share their love. I mean, it's astonishing. So that's a great message to us too. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Penelope.
Mm-hmm.
Christine, go ahead.
Yes, I could repeat things that others have said, your vulnerability and being willing to take us into your personal story involving grief and shame. Yeah, I think there's so much resonance there for me, and I'm sure others.
So, Christine, if I may mention about that, part of my work has involved shedding shame and guilt as motivators. They're poor motivators. I'm tenaciously seeking more truth because I believe in the adage, the truth will set us free. And repressing truth, blocking out, avoiding is to our detriment.
Thank you for that clarification. I have experienced what you described there in response to the last questioner about that the ancestors are picking up on the work that we do in our family lineage. I absolutely feel that, and yeah, it's something significant in the scales of life. I have a strange thing I want to shout out here too. I happen to just be picking up reading a second time, but this Nathaniel Philbrick has written a whole book about this, and has the foreword. And there's someone here tonight who, oh, good, I like that. Andrew, did you notice there's someone?
I noticed there's a Philbrick. Please identify yourself.
He's the brother.
I have to ask, are you here? Is he related?
Stephen?
Hi.
Hi.
He is my cousin.
Well,
and we have family that participated in that industry.
wow.
Amazing.
I hope you don't mind me calling you out, but I was just like, really, Philbrick?
No, I'm happy. Thank you.
Good. Okay.
Thank you. Let's go with Jeff and Stephen, if in a moment you would like to introduce yourself, that would be amazing.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be brief, or I'll try to be. I really appreciate this, your investigation, your sharing of it, and the Jungian approach I'm finding, yeah, really rich. I'm like, I think probably everyone on this call doing my own ancestral digging and have a very similar, not the whaling part, but have, an old New England history, and I'm looking at what reconciliation and repair look like, both as a personal project and as a political project. And in that sense, my question is something like, are you getting any, I don't know what venues you're bringing this to, but any negative reactions? I mean, we're at a moment in our country's history, we always have been, I believe, but that where the shadow is very much in charge, and to look right at that and say, maybe we need to reconcile, maybe we need to recognize the violence of our past, assuming that violence is a bad thing. And a lot of people right now are in favor of violence in a way that I think you and we are not. So anyway, I guess my question is, are you encountering resistance to, your telling of your way of looking at this stuff?
I haven't encountered it, but I do believe that if people who identify as Christian nationalists or have a fascist bent would want to shut this truth down completely and rebury it. And I'm aware in Germany there is a movement to be done with the truth speaking there about the Holocaust, for example. And there is in this country, as you're aware, a flavor of don't make me or my children feel bad about our beloved country. And
so all the more reason why I see what you're doing as a vital political project. If we can inject this consciousness into a bigger mainstream conversation and try to gently say, no, we have to look at this stuff, and
it may surprise you, Jeff. I don't want to make anybody feel bad. I don't want to ruin anyone's day. I actually want freedom and wholeness for it's. By the way, are you related to Roger Conant?
I am, and that's who I'm descended from him, and I'm looking at that and writing about that.
I love the man. He was such a dear Quaker friend for me. Yeah.
I'd love the chance to be in touch and learn more.
Let's do that.
Part of what I'm looking at is he wasn't, the worst of the kind of violent American. He was maybe among, he was very positive, and yet there's untold stories there and perspectives that are erased and so forth. So, yeah.
Excellent. I hope we can talk. Okay, let's go to Adele. Adele, go ahead and unmute.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Akashic Records, but it is said that they are located in Wales. I don't know if that's something you've heard before.
No, not at all.
Oh, okay, that was pretty much just my question. Do you know what the Akashic records are? Do you? Oh, okay. It's just kind of like apparently like a record of all history of like all like mystical experience. So you like can open your own Akashic record and find out about all of your past lives. So it's, yeah, apparently they exist in the whales, and however you want to interpret that. But I feel that whales are pretty sacred animals, and that supports that. So
I have been told by indigenous associates that the whales are the memory keepers of the planet.
that checks out. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
And I have worked with people who've helped me do ancestral healing work who are more seers, visionaries. So yeah. What I didn't say about working with the kahuna was when we sat down opposite each other, he said, wait. There's a crowd of ancestors who are crowding in. They want to hear, they're very interested in this.
Wow.
It was bizarre. Yeah. Thank you. The Akashic Record. I'll look into that. You know, I'm noticing our time is running down. Thank you, Adele. Stephen, would you like to tell us more about where you're coming from, and then we'll conclude our session tonight?
Sure. Thank you. Well, whales and my family and writing about whales is one little thread that you tugged at. And specifically the story of the whale ship Essex, which was the one that was sunk in 1820 or whatever, and Melville based Moby Dick on it. My father used to observe that that ruined Melville's career as a best-selling author of seafaring romance novels. That he was doing very well for himself until Moby Dick. And then my dad wrote a almost book-length poem about the whale ship Essex that I'm sure several dozen people ever read, poetry being what it is. And then my dad did not live to see cousin Nat write a book called In the Heart of the Sea, which is telling the story of the survivors of the Essex, for which he received a $1.1 million advance. So it gave all the rest of us cousins, finally someone is rewarded for writing about the whale ship Essex. I also particularly appreciated your mixing the light and the shadow brief portraits of Captain Cash, because when taken together, the repressed one who had command and the more giving one that people experienced after he retired from the sea, it made me feel, oh, well, there's a whole person.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
I come from those people. I know those people. And so the odds probably are pretty good that I am those people. But thank you for all that you gave us tonight.
Thank you. And I'll stop the share here. And I just want to thank you all for this opportunity. Thank you for accompanying me on a deep dive, and I'm open to any conversation following this if you're interested. Thank you all.
Thank you, Andrew, from the whole board and all of the audience.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.